The National Investor's motto is, you can get information anywhere, but here you get knowledge. And for well over 40 years now, Chris Temple has imparted that knowledge, an unparalleled, understandable, and useful take on the big picture of the markets and of our world. He has been out in front of what you see on the news every day on many themes. More, Chris has taken this macro knowledge and his unique analytical abilities to uncover unique investment opportunities. Often he has guided his members to big winners in resources, biotech stocks, and more. His talents and connections often getting him into ground floor opportunities before they are discovered. Without further ado, here is Chris with today's topic.
I'm Chris Temple, editor and publisher of the National Investor, and another premier story today from British Columbia's Golden Triangle, that being the story of Dolly Varden Silver. I've followed Dolly Varden actually for a number of years on and off. That was under prior management. We've got much more energetic and hands-on management, as you're going to learn, in charge of this project today, and it has emerged in the mining sector over the last year or two is one of the major up-and-coming stories. Its chart looks better than most companies in the space that have all been on the back foot, as we all know, from the precious metals related equities being out of favor again for a while. That's going to change inevitably, and as I've said many times, I'll repeat today, I think it's going to be a matter of months rather than years before things come about. So you're going to learn Dolly Varden's story today in a minute when I bring on its CEO, Shawn Khunkhun. First of all, understand that Shawn and or myself might be making some forward-looking statements. All the best laid plans don't always come about as great or as quickly as you think they might. There's other risks involved, of course, in resource exploration, so you need to be aware of that. Secondly, here at the National Investor, Dolly Varden Silver is a current recommendation of mine to our paid members. And with Dolly Varden, as we do with other companies from time to time, they will pay us a fee for some follow-on media placement, some copywriting, and a variety of different things, of which this video is an example. So we want you to understand that as well. Further, and before I bring on Shawn, do your own homework, folks. This is a really, really cool and premier story. It's one that is far and away more impressive than the average gold and silver exploration story you're going to run into. So here on the screen, I've had all of their contact information. Get on their mailing list, make sure you follow them on social media and so forth. And likewise, where yours truly is concerned, very shortly following your watching this video, we're going to have an update of my signature essay, if you will, on the history of precious metals, how they work today in 2024, how you should approach the market, why you should be interested in the market, and what companies to take a serious look at. Dolly Varden, of course, being one of those that will be covered in that issue as well. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you my friend Shawn Khunkhun, the CEO of Dolly Varden Silver. Shawn, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it was great when you and I at long last finally got a chance to sit down at some length and go over Dolly Varden's story at the New Orleans Investment Conference last fall. It was one where I think each of us in different ways were pushed to get together by mutual friends and colleagues. In my case, certainly, hey, dummy, don't fall asleep any longer on this story. You need to learn what Dolly Varden is all about these days. Because as I said earlier, I had been familiar with the company years ago under former management. But since you have come in there, this story has really exploded in the sector. You're one of the rock stars, I think, among people who follow chiefly or exclusively the resource industry. And there's a lot of very good reasons for that. And I want to get into those. First of all, starting with yourself. You've got a great resume. You came at this first as an investor, I think, looking for a story that comported with your outlook on things, with a lot of good, successful investment ventures on your resume already. But you looked at this, you brought the right team to bear. So give us a little bit of that rundown of what drew you to Dolly Varden.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Before I do that, I just want to say when we sat down together a few months back in New Orleans. I sit down and I do a lot of meetings. And I was really impressed with what I heard from you in terms of your experience, your macro outlook, the way you articulated it all. And so I just want to say that, when I was sitting down with you, I just thought, wow, like there's a lot I could learn from Chris, and I really enjoyed getting to know you. So, and I really appreciate this opportunity to get on in front of your audience.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But I don't even remember your question. No, I'm kidding.
That's all right. We're not here trying to put on a formal show for people. This is
No, I know.
conversational. You
Well,
know, you
listen, I want
yeah,
to tell
you
you about.
saw something in Dolly Varden
Yeah, yeah.
that
I want to take you back to that.
yeah,
So, look, I think what your viewers need to appreciate is I was a kid that was born and raised in Vancouver, BC, Canada. But my parents had come over. My dad came over from India when he was 21 years old. And, they came over here. And as I grew up, again, I was educated here in North America. And throughout my childhood, gold would be brought up. There would be a wedding or there would be something going on where I'd see my parents go out and they'd exchange dollars for gold. And I thought these two people were insane because all I knew about gold growing up here in Vancouver was it was jewelry, and that's it. And it wasn't until 20 years ago, I found my way into conferences like New Orleans, and I would listen to people like Rick Rule and others talk about gold as money. And in my early 20s, like I started in this business at 22, but it wasn't probably until my mid 20s that I had that aha moment. And it was a few things that were happening. It was record debt levels. We were heading into this big real estate boom in the US. And, this is 2 years before the great financial crisis. But I could just feel something coming. And that's when I started in 2006. I probably was in my mid 20s at the time. I started going out and buying. I couldn't afford gold, Chris, but I could afford silver, and I started buying physical silver. And what I learned over the course of the period of building mining companies, like my first mining company, we started at inception. We started it with an idea, and we went from zero to a $1.4 billion value. It took 6.5 years. It took an incredible team. It took a lot of sunk invest. It was like all the stars were lining up. But what I learned from that experience was I made more money speculating on silver stocks in 6 months than I did building a gold mining company in 6.5 years. And so fast forward to Dolly Varden, I was on the hunt for silver. I was on the hunt for high grade silver in a safe jurisdiction. And when I came across Dolly, it was the 20 years of experience that said, okay, this is the one. And I got really lucky that there was a series of events that have taken place since me coming on as CEO 4 years ago. For example, I was able to convince Eric Sprott to get behind me, which was the game changer. And we also had silver have a bit of a moment there in 2020. And when it did, we filled our treasury. And going through different markets and different companies and different cycles, learning from the mistakes myself and other management teams had made in the past and trying to do things better has led us to the product that we put in front of you today, which is Dolly Varden. And today what the company is it's 140 million ounces of high grade silver equivalent. It's 50% silver, 50% gold. It's in an area that we refer to as the Golden Triangle in Northwest BC. The stock trades. So, like if you're an investor and you're looking for exposure to silver, you can feel confident that you can come in and you can come out. I feel like we've created a must-own silver name.
Yeah.
It's got size, it's got sale, it trades. And then I have been the quarterback of of $75 million of equity financings for what was a tiny little company, which is a little bit bigger today.
I'll say, I mean, I remember back when I first was introduced to it, I think it had an under $10 million market cap, and they kind of sublet most of what work they did years ago on the project. And you've had this, there's just been this great gem of an asset sitting there all this time until you came in. And I think importantly, as you pointed out to me when we met, Shawn, you don't sublet anything. You've got dedicated people who work for Dolly Varden that are there on the ground and making one new discovery after another.
Yeah, there was a friend. His name is Alex Takumas, and Alex had worked with the previous management team on Dolly Varden. And Alex, he's been a part of some really important, successful ventures recently, like Prime Mining or American Lithium. And Alex, as he was handing over the reins of Dolly Varden to me, he said, "Shawn, it just needs some love. That's all. That's all it needs. Just give it some love." And all I did is I said, "Okay, you know what? We're going in-house. We're hiring full-time people, and we're going to align them with shareholders. Their success is going to be aligned with shareholder success." And so I have a belief, Chris, that we as an industry haven't explored and haven't incentivized discovery and exploration for multi decades. Like we've gone through, really, I'd argue, 4 decades without really putting a proper emphasis on exploration, which has led to an undersupply of reserves. And so my thinking, specifically, my vision, my strategy with Dolly Varden was, let's secure a high grade supply in the ground of future silver for the world. And why that's become relevant recently is you've got the world's fastest growing established silver miner, Hecla, which trades on the NYSE under HL, fastest growing silver producer who is keen on growing its footprint in North America. They're in the Yukon, they're in Alaska, they're in BC, they're in Idaho. They're keen on securing more Canadian silver supply. So they're a 15% shareholder. And so I'm already seeing that original vision starting to be validated even before this bull market begins.
Well, you mentioned a key word, supply. And you see my stuff that I put out from time to time. And one of the things I wrote back during the holidays was, if you want to understand the markets in 2024, you only need to understand 3 words: supply, supply, and supply. And the story going forward with lots of different commodities, and it's going to be a rolling thing. It's not going to be all at once, but it's going to be a lack of supply. We've had massive, just to use one example in the case of silver, which you of course know this, and I would suspect the majority of our watchers do as well. We have seen massive supply of solar capability build out in the world, especially in China. That takes a lot of silver. There's all kinds of industrial demand for silver beyond that, other applications to the green economy and so forth. And yet, as you pointed out, there's not been nearly enough, and it's been across the board with all commodities, there's not been nearly enough ongoing exploration and development. So we've got a game plan so that policymakers and industry can look 20, 30, 50 years ahead and say, we know where our silver's coming from. We know where our copper's coming from. We know where this and that is coming from. The light bulb, as I'm sure you also follow and know, over the last couple of years, has gone off over people's heads where uranium is concerned, because that's been one of the more acute things. And I've been telling people over and over again that the next ones are going to be copper and silver, which is in deficit, and other materials, where it's not any longer a story of how healthy the economy is or isn't that's going to incrementally increase or decrease the demand for these things. The story is all going to be about supply. And we're going to learn these things the hard way. And so as you're building a company that is looking to build up significant resources for the future. You're going to get on a lot more people's radars, especially when they come to understand the security issues, the lack of supply, and so forth. One of the cool things I'd like you to explain just a second, you got a couple of neat slides of the history in your deck that I'll share here too. And this kind of I found cool because I love history, and whether it's mining history or other things. This was a massive, massive high grade producer many years ago, wasn't it, in this area?
It was, and what you have to appreciate is if you think back to the 1890s, at the time of the Klondike Gold Rush up in the Yukon, as prospectors made their way up, they some of them stopped through this area that is the Golden Triangle, and on our property, silver was discovered in early 1900s, around 1904, 1905. But it was actually a mining engineer who became your president, Herbert Hoover, who opened the Dolly Varden silver mine in 1919. And at the time, Canada was part of the British. It was a British colony. So at the time, the Dolly Varden silver mine was the richest mine in all of the British Empire. And that was, if you think about how vast that empire was at the time, that was really saying something. And then if you fast forward a few decades, a deposit that was right next door that we refer to as the Torbrit deposit, which is part of our land package, it was Canada's third largest silver producer, and it produced for a decade. And so there's been a trend that's been happening up north. We call it the reawakening of past treasures. And so there's some very, very famous mines, Eskay Creek, the Premier Mine. These are some of the most famous, richest gold and silver mines on the planet. These mines are now going back into development, and in the case of Premier, going back into production. So, I always joke with friends and family that I've never had an original idea, that I don't recreate the wheel, that I'm not a trailblazer. There was a path that was laid out for me by other companies like Skeena Resources. And Skeena, if you go back to 2019, they were a $35 million company. They soared to $1 billion valuation on the reawakening of Eskay Creek, which is just to the north of us. And that's what we're doing. The best place to find silver and gold is in the shadow of a head frame, or the other way to say that is next to an old mine. So exactly. The old timers had did an incredible job getting into the richest part of the ore body. But what's happened up north is we've actually had glaciers retreat. We've had the government bring in roads and infrastructure, a deep water seaport, hydroelectric power. And so this area, if you go back to 1999, 1999, so about 25 years ago, Barrick Gold was operating the Eskay Creek mine, and it was so rich that they were flying the gold out of Eskay Creek. They were flying it out. Now think about, where was the gold price back then? It had a $200 handle on it, not right. 2,000, right? So fast forward a couple of decades, you've got roads, you've got powers, you've got the glaciers receding, you've got $2,000 gold. And so I'm coming in, and the competitive advantage is now I can leverage some of the best technologies and also all the improvements in infrastructure and the rest of it, and the higher metal prices. It's an incredible opportunity.
Well, for sure. And I've said in several other contexts before, not only in the Golden Triangle, but even in places like the state of Nevada, even in the Abitibi in Eastern Canada, and of all the crazy places that's being rediscovered in the Carolinas in the US, that there are places where primitive, by modern standards, mining was done. A lot of good stuff was found, but more good stuff was left behind. And really, when you look at modern technology, modern exploration methods, all the electronics involved and the seismic involved, and now the AI, artificial intelligence involved that some are using, we're really at the re-beginning or reawakening. What was the term you used again, Shawn?
The reawakening.
The reawakening, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there that has never been touched or found beyond the easy pickings of years past, even in a place like the Golden Triangle. So that's pretty cool. Now, besides the Dolly Varden project, you guys a while back from Fury Gold Mines acquired Homestake, and that has added a couple other dimensions to it. It bolstered your indicated and inferred resource, which is now up to what, 140
That's right.
million ounces silver equivalent between indicated and inferred resources. Some of that, of course, as you said, being gold. But even beyond some of the Dolly Varden property, Homestake, as you have found out a couple of times already, has got very high grades of both silver and gold. What was it that attracted you chiefly aside from that? Was it the geographical proximity? You're really looking to build up a district of your own?
Yeah. So one thing I want to point out here is Dolly Varden's success and future does not hinge on drilling success.
Okay.
This is not a company that, it's a binary outcome where we're going to go drill a hole, and if we don't find an extension or if we don't expand a zone, that it's game over. And so the reason I brought the Homestake in, so if you go back to when I took over this company, I inherited a company with 44 million ounces of silver at good grade. Price of silver at the time was around $16 or $17. So I sat down with engineers and I said to the guys, I said, look, be conservative. What do I need to do here to make this economic? And at the time they said to me, they said, Shawn, you can do one of two things. You can either find twice as many ounces, or you need to find the equivalent amount of ounces at twice the grade. And if you do that, you got an economic project on your hands. And I thought, and so people said to me, Shawn, you're never going to get to 100 million ounces. And so I said, really, that sounds like a challenge. So on the front cover of my presentation, I put out there a quest for 100 million ounces. And, as we started drilling, I thought to myself, there's a solution that's staring me right in the face. Just north of our drill rig was a gold project that on a silver equivalent basis was over 90 million ounces of silver EQ. So I thought to myself, my solution's sitting right there. And so I approached the guys who owned the project, and they said to me, first of all, we don't know you, right? We don't know you. And so if you want this, give us $100 million of cash and we'll sell it to you. And this was at a time where gold was $1,300 an ounce. And I thought, there's a movie with Jim Carrey called Dumb and Dumber. And there's a moment in the movie where Jim likes this girl and he asks her a question and she's like, when I will date you when hell freezes over. And he goes, so you're saying there's a chance? And when these guys told me that I could buy this thing for $100 million, I was Jim Carrey in that moment. I thought, oh, there's a deal to be done here.
Yeah.
So I patiently waited and I got lucky where I raised $27 million for my little company. And they went through some struggles.
Mm-hmm.
And then they got to know me over a 2-year period. And they got to know that some of the promises that I was making and the vision that I outlaid, I was actually following through with it. So they had trust in me. So they actually came back to me and said, we don't want to sell you this project. And I said, okay. And they said, we want to partner with you. And so what we ended up doing is it was a $50 million deal, not 100. And 45 million of it was in shares. And so they became 37% owners of Dolly Varden. We parted with 5 million of cash and we parted with $45 million worth of stock. And what was incredible was normally when a company makes an acquisition, the acquiring company shares go down because it's seen as a dilutive event. Our shares went up. And our shareholders had to vote on the transaction. And they voted 99.9% in favor. And it was the most wildly accretive deal I've ever been a part of. And I've done a lot of deals in this business in the last 20 years. And I've done deals where I've said, Chris, that was the buy of the century, right? And this one made so much sense because they had a project, 90 million ounces on its own wasn't big enough, and 44 million ounces on its own, but you put them together. Now all of a sudden, instead of building two facilities, you're only building one. You got
Right.
economy of scale and the rest of it. But the other part of it was all the exploration in between the two deposits. They never looked at because neither company wanted to increase the value of the neighbors. What if the mother lode was sitting on their side of the ground and vice versa?
Right.
So a lot of the new discoveries we're making now are in the gap zone, as we're bridging the gap and in between deposits. And so that it was a phenomenal deal, and it was a deal that took 2 years to complete, but we were patient. And like I always say, like good business is boring, and it takes time, right? But a steady hand and focus and being disciplined, and it's worked out all right.
Well, you've had a couple of news releases from Home Stake that have really been off the charts, very impressive intercepts. And it was about a year ago, one of them was over an ounce of gold per ton, with some of the drilling that you had. Just a couple of weeks ago, as we're recording this on the 16th of January, you came out with news that showed, was it 93 meters, which it's a long whack of over 350 ounces of silver equivalent. And you don't see those numbers every day.
No, you don't. And what I celebrate about this project is, and this is something that the average viewer, somebody new to the mining space, is not going to appreciate, but not all ounces are created equal.
Right.
And if you think about these old projects, and the challenge with reawakening an old project, some of these old projects only worked 100 years ago, because 100 years ago you'd have labor that was willing to go into an area with their hands and sort ore and do things that people aren't willing to do today. And so what you really need in today's world is you need deposits that are big enough where you can do bulk mining. And when you talk about that 300-foot intercept, right? What gets me excited is I've got something big enough that I can bulk mine. And that's the difference between finding a narrow, high-grade system that's a mile below the surface versus a nice wide system that's daylighting. Now, what's really interesting about Dolly Varden is within that news release, we put out within that drill hole, there was 9 meters, right? Like almost 30 feet of almost 3 kilos of silver equivalent. So I almost think this project has something for everybody. I don't think Dolly Varden is going to be the company that takes this operation into production, because I'm a businessman. And as a businessman, I see risks of construction, and I see dilution of raising the capital to build. And if there is an opportunity in our future where someone comes along and pays us for that opportunity, I will do that deal for my shareholders. And so what's interesting about me saying that is having the kilo material, the extreme high grade over a nice mineable width, but also having the bulk mineable, grades as well. We're open for business for many, many different types of companies. Some that are looking for the narrow, some that are looking for the wide, some that are looking for the gold, some that are looking for the silver. And the more suitors that we have, the better price discovery and the more competitive tension you will have as a shareholder.
Well, sure thing. And I think you and I have had the conversation, I've had it with others as well, that the overwhelming majority of the time, the big money is made in this industry by making this discovery and getting it ready for someone else. and taking that business and economic risk off of your shareholders. Get a nice payday, you can go on to the next project, pretty much. Yeah. Now, one more piece of the puzzle just came in place in the very recent past, since Homestake, and you made another acquisition in building your district footprint, which not only is compelling for precious metals, but seemingly is introducing the potential of a copper porphyry or some such thing into the picture. And of course, copper being another metal, as we said earlier, like silver, which is going to be in some deficit. Copper, astonishingly so, and nobody's woke up to that yet.
Yeah. Well, look, the Homestake deal took 2 years. This one took 4. And one of the first meetings I did was on this big bulk porphyry. And for a number of reasons, it just didn't fit with what I was doing at the time. You know, we weren't running big exploration programs. This is a big target. But after 4 years of monitoring this opportunity, and the company that had it had essentially gone broke. It was a little junior that was trading at a couple of pennies a share. They'd run out of money. Their payables were high. So I walked in and I offered them, what it cost us as a company was for $1.5 million. We now have, and over a 4-year period of time, it was $50,000 down. We now have the right to get 100% interest. And what I see in this porphyry, first of all, I'm a huge copper bull. But I do believe that before, copper's probably a year out, right? We are first, and this is where you and I have alignment. It's going to be gold first, then silver, and then copper. So we're early on the copper side, but I believe in the electrification of the world, and it has nothing to do with EVs, but it has to do with, the continent of Africa, wanting to experience what we experience in North America. It's the continent of Asia. It's South America. It's the rest of the world. It's billions of people saying, I want what you have, right? Which is to flick a light switch and for there to be steady, stable power. And so I believe copper is such an essential part of our future. And what's really interesting about silver is 70% of the silver that gets produced is thrown off as a byproduct. There's very few primary silver mines. So I think the fact that we're in such short supply of copper is actually one of the, best bullish signs for silver, in that most of the silver just is a byproduct. But no, I think the big bulk deal was an incredible deal for our shareholders. And again, 95% of our focus is going to be going after the gold and the silver, but we'll spend a little bit of resources. We'll take about 5% of our budget in 2024, and we'll try to give our shareholders that exposure to making. And again, we know there's copper in the system. There's been drilling done in the past. We know it's a fertile porphyry. We know there's high-grade veins at surface. There's a bunch of historic information. And then some of the biggest miners in the world had actually come to us and asked us to do the deal. And the other part of it is, as we look for a future business transaction, reducing the number of companies in the area so that no longer, having Fury, having that consolidated, having big bulk, it simplifies a future transaction.
Well, which stands to reason, because in the end, when you're looking at the inevitability of the best projects going to development and production, there's a handful of companies that have got the chops and the bank accounts and the expertise to do that. So it makes sense that this is going to be one step, perhaps, in consolidating these into, from smaller penny stocks into the hands of a bigger, more astute exploration company like yourself, to get these things to the point where they can be passed off again, theoretically, to someone who is actually going to develop them. In the Golden Triangle, let alone most other parts of the world these days, ESG is a big deal, and you also have to make sure that the folks who are hosting you, the First Nations in the area, are on board, and you have done a stellar job of checking those boxes. Tell us a little bit about the level of involvement by the First Nations or with them in the project.
Well, and this is like, this is an even broader conversation of what, like you talked about silver and, and Mexico is the number one silver producer in the world.
Right.
And because this whole ESG push is a global push, right? So you have a situation where what made these other countries so competitive is because their environmental and social standards and safety standards weren't where the rest of the world was at.
Right.
And so now you have this reaction that's sweeping Latin America where they're saying, hey, these are our resources, or we don't want you to go after these resources. We don't want open pit projects. And it's becoming more and more increasingly difficult to operate in those areas. But here in the North, they call it ESG now, but when I started in the business, we used the word sustainability. So really, mining in a thoughtful way has always been what we do, right? Like you've got these pristine environments where these mines are located. How do you advance a project with minimal disturbance in a thoughtful way that benefits the communities that are around the project? Now, we're in Northwest BC, and in Northwest BC, we've got the Indigenous people, the Nisga'a. So the Nisga'a, they are a First Nations group. The first Indigenous member of the legislature was from Nisga'a. The first Aboriginal elected in Canada was from the Nisga'a Nation. So the Nisga'a Nation have always been on the cutting edge of progress and being creative. And in 1998, they signed a treaty, a land settlement treaty. It was a landmark deal where they said, we are no longer having any land disputes. And that's been in place since 1998. And so when I met the Nisga'a, what started as just a very, very simple relationship of, me, the CEO of Dolly Varden, just trying to move the project forward in a thoughtful way, has actually turned into a friendship and a partnership and a level of mutual respect that now has us meeting on a weekly basis. And we're actually launching all sorts of businesses together. We're on the cusp of launching a royalty business with the Nisga'a. And so the Nisga'a are just an incredible people. They travel with me to different centers. So, recently we went to New York and to Colorado. And so I'll be sitting in a meeting and I'll have my, Nisga'a representative with me, and a fund manager will say, Shawn, why is Charles from Nisga'a here? And Charles will say, I am here to bring certainty to this project so that that the community, that first of all, and this is something I learned from a guy, Bob Quartermain, who built Pretium, Bruce, and Bob taught me this. And again, going back to what I said to you, I've never had an original idea and I've never tried to reinvent the wheel. I've just followed the legends that have come before me. And what I learned from Bob is, who better knows the landscape, the weather? We're in the North. The Nisga'a have been living in the North for hundreds, if not thousands of years. They know it better than we do. So they're our guides. And so let's leverage that expertise of the land to help us move this thing forward. And gone are the days where they're going to get 1% of this project. We're now at a time where, first of all, 30% of our team is Nisga'a, right? So there's employment opportunities, but there's more than that. And they're wonderful people. And again, we're at the stage right now where we're investigating, right? And what we're investigating is how many billions of dollars of ore is sitting under their ground.
Right.
And then we'll create a situation where they'll benefit from the extraction of that, and we'll do it in a way where there's minimal disturbance. Yeah, listen, the Nisga'a know more about mining than the rest of us. They've had mining operations in their backyard for the last 100 years, and they're planning for the next 100 years.
Neat. Well, look, as we wind down, you got a lot of different, I mean, several on the project. And we've shared a couple of the maps while you were talking earlier about Dolly Varden and now Homestake, big bulk added most recently. What are the mileposts that you want us to look for in 2024 as far as additional drill? I mean, last year you drilled what, 50 some thousand meters?
Yeah.
So what are your plans
So
for 2024 as far as drilling the next resource estimate or estimates, plural perhaps, and where we go?
in terms of upcoming catalysts and milestones, we have over 40 drill holes to report. And I think the way we've driven this company's growth, whether it's the share price, the market capitalization of the company, is on the back of discovery news. So we've got 40 drill holes that we're excited to report. And one of the ideas that I'm trying to validate is these 7 deposits, these 7 high-grade silver and gold deposits, I think they're connected. And so we've got some holes that are well beyond the existing resources that are calculated in that 140 million ounce report. So I think there is an opportunity to step out and really extend and expand and really fill in the gaps between the various deposits. So we've got results coming. We'll put out our drill plans for 24, and we'll get out there and the best way a company like Dolly Varden can add value to its shareholders is the most cost-effective way is through discovery. And so that's an opportunity where this is an exercise in increasing the mineral inventory. And again, when I took over, we had 44 million ounces. Today we have 140 million ounces. We are going to be valued on an in situ basis, on an enterprise value per ounce. And so when I took over, those 40 million ounces were being multiplied by 40 cents an ounce in the ground, giving us a $16 million valuation. Today, the 140 million ounces that we have in the ground are being multiplied by $1 an ounce. So we've got roughly about $150 million valuation. If we can demonstrate that we have 200 million ounces. And in bull markets, ounces in the ground, particularly ones of this grade and this size, will warrant a $3 per ounce valuation. That's what we've seen in previous bull markets.
Sure.
So if we can get to, say, 200 million ounces, that's a $600 million valuation. And what if we get to 300 million ounces? And what if this next bull market is bigger than the last bull market?
I agree. You know, I've many times told the story, and in the upcoming precious metals issue that Dolly Varden will be part of. And again, folks, if you're not on my list, make sure you're on it to get that. There are a set of identifiable reasons why in less than 3 years, in the wake of the global financial crisis, the price of gold tripled and silver was up 4-fold plus. And I believe we're going to see in the coming months, maybe year and a half or so, a variety of things as far as debt levels, the economy slowing down, what the central banks are going to do in response that are going to give us this next secular move higher for precious metals. So who knows how much more that $3 turns into on top of your discoveries. And again, as we said at the top, folks, this is one of the handful of exploration stories like this in the metal space that you need to take the most seriously. So, Shawn, any other parting words beyond that?
Just one last one.
Sure.
What $3 used to buy in the last bull market, $3 no longer buys.
No.
And so it has to be higher to represent how many more. There was a young girl that we had 3 shows here in Vancouver. There was a 8-year-old girl that came by the booth. And I said to her, I said, get your dad to give you a $20 bill and an ounce of silver. And just before I could even finish the thought, she said to me, 8 years old, her name was Isabel. She said to me, Shawn, that ounce of silver is going to be worth a lot more than $20 because the way they're printing money, it's going to take that many more dollars to get. And I thought, you're hired.
Yeah. That is true. It's very true. And there's no end in sight to what governments are doing, what central banks are doing, and so forth. It's been the same story since you know, back in 1971, the pivotal time here in the US when the old gold standard went away, and it's been, you know, not always uphill since, but you look at gold especially, and it has done every bit as well as has real estate and stocks and everything else since 1971. And there are reasons I think that it will do even better than that in the coming few years. So again, folks, I can't stress enough, this is one of the premier exploration stories in metals you need to be aware of. Make sure you visit Dolly Varden's website, get on their mailing list, follow them, etc. And again, make sure you keep up with yours truly, because I'll have updates from time to time. We'll have Dolly Varden covered in our precious metals issue upcoming, not many days hence, and a lot of other stuff that's to come. And with what we see in front of us, you know, Shawn, each year things get crazier and crazier. You know, you've got COVID, you've got breakouts of wars, you've got what are now commodity wars across the planet, and things like this. And now we see what is a chronically higher threshold of inflation and interest rates that we're going to have to get used to. And that's going to exacerbate all of the other things even more. And it really helps make the case for why, not that it's where all of your portfolio belongs, folks, but why precious metals more than in a long time are going to be an increasingly important anchor. And don't wait for everybody else to wake up to this, folks. Believe me, do your homework, place your bets, and enjoy what I think is going to be an interesting ride ahead. So, Shawn, I look forward to the next time that we can sit down and break bread. And in the meantime, I'm looking forward to those added drill holes and all the other good stuff to come. So thanks again, and we'll look forward to keeping in touch.
Grateful for the opportunity. Thanks, Chris.
For much more of the National Investor's cutting-edge content and actionable investment opportunities, make sure to subscribe to Chris's free content at nationalinvestor.com. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel too. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.